Democrats and Republicans are honing their messages for the upcoming midterms.
It's common sense versus communism. It really is, folks.
Donald Trump is the most corrupt president in American history.
From Capitol News, Illinois, it's Friday, August 21st. I'm Peter Hancock.
I'm Brendan Moore.
I'm Ben Zielinski.
I'm Jerry Nowicki.
We'll talk about what happened at Governor's Day and Republican Day festivities at the Illinois State Fair on this edition of Capitol Cast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Capitol Cast. This week we heard a lot of speeches about what this year's midterm elections are all about. As we just heard, Massachusetts U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren told a crowd of Democrats on Wednesday that it's about defeating Donald Trump. And Bob Grogan, the new chairman of the Illinois Republican Party, called it a choice between communism and common sense. So let's talk about those messages, starting with the Democrats. Brendan, you've written that Donald Trump has been the central figure in Republican politics for a decade now. And during that time, Republicans have not won a single statewide race in Illinois, which probably explains why he was barely mentioned at Republican Day events. But the fact of the matter is, he's not on the ballot this year, and he never will be again. So does it make sense for Democrats to focus on Donald Trump? And how long do you think they can keep that message up?
For them, it absolutely makes sense. Donald Trump is the incumbent president. He's deeply unpopular. I checked today, and kind of an aggregate poll showed that he was at about 38% nationally. And obviously, Illinois skews a bit to the left of the country, so you can assume that it's a little bit lower here in Illinois. And so it does make sense for them to win elections because Trump, in particular, is not popular in Chicago or the Chicago suburbs, where you need to do well if you want to win in Illinois. It's where most of the people are, and Republicans haven't figured out an answer to that. I suppose their response was kind of a muted one. We're just not going to say his name. They weren't completely walking away from him. I mean, Don Tracy, for instance, the candidate for Senate, said that he would welcome President Trump's endorsement, but they weren't going out of their way to embrace the president as maybe they did a few years ago. And I think in a way, too, it also allows for Democrats to deflect from, some legitimate questions about their policies here in Illinois, about how those have impacted the lives of the folks here, especially on issues like affordability. Obviously, Illinois still has some of the highest property taxes in the country, and energy prices have been soaring. And there are questions about policies in Springfield, how they've impacted that. But it's pretty easy to distract from that when you can focus on President Trump, focus on the tariffs, focus on the war in Iran, and really say, well, no, the reason why things are bad, the reason why things are unaffordable is because of what's happening in Washington.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that Democrats have also kind of had a hard time defining themselves, at least on the national stage. Here in Illinois, we think of J.B. Pritzker, who, like him or not, has been a very effective leader for Illinois Democrats. But nationally, there's not anybody that you can really point to who is the face and the voice of a national Democratic Party. And I think part of that has to do with the 2024 elections. It's kind of hard to overstate how much of a gut punch that was when Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris. And a lot of Democrats have not really come to terms with that. We heard Elizabeth Warren talking to Democrats this week, saying that it was time to end the hand-wringing. But there's now this struggle within the Democratic Party between the traditional moderates like Dick Durbin, who they were all there to celebrate, and this rising brand of Democratic socialists and progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York. Just in the past couple of weeks, a number of progressives and self-described socialists have been winning contested primaries. J.B. Pritzker called this a battle between the party of fight versus the party of cave. That is, those who are willing to stand up and take on President Trump, and those who don't, those who try to work with him. But it's also interesting, that it was just less than a year ago, in the fall of 2025, Senate Democrats were blocking passage of a budget because it didn't include federal subsidies for the Affordable Care Act insurance, led to a government shutdown that lasted 43 days. Dick Durbin was part of the group that voted to end the shutdown after a deal was brokered that did not actually lead to the funding of those subsidies. And Dick Durbin took a lot of criticism over that from the left flank of the party. Now we've got Republicans who are responding by calling all Democrats, kind of branding them not only as socialists but also communists, as we heard from the Republican chairman. And I remember during the Republican day, it was specifically calling out Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, who's running to succeed Durbin in the Senate, referring to her multiple times as a socialist. Jerry, you were one of the first who caught on to this theme as we were going through the Republican events. How many times do you think we heard the word socialist or communist during those events? That seemed to be a running theme for them.
Yeah, they employed that quite a bit. I think one of the other things that they tried to get across was that, one of the lines Don Tracy used was, Republicans aren't perfect, but the other side is flat out crazy. So, the what's the pitch here? Is it that, you may not like Trump, but the Democrats are doing all sorts of things that you wouldn't have thought about 20 years ago. So I don't. That's kind of what they're getting at.
The Democrats are so far to the left that Donald Trump looks like a centrist by comparison.
Yeah, I don't know. So the interesting thing for me was just that. I think there's a caveat to point out here about them not mentioning Trump. It's not because the people in the room wouldn't have liked it. Like everyone there, I think when there was even allusions to, our president, or there was good things from him coming from the White House and the Supreme Court, and that got some pretty loud cheers, I think, when you guys had stepped out and were doing some interviews. But the fact is that it was the people that weren't in the room, the people that they have to sway to get to the ballots, that they, they'll have a hard time if they tie themselves to the president in Illinois, just looking at the last decade of history.
Well, I want to turn to Ben, because you wrote that while Democrats were focusing all their energy on Donald Trump, you wrote about how Republicans are uniting behind their common enemy, J.B. Pritzker. Why don't you tell us a little more about how that's working out?
Yeah, we heard a lot about why J.B. Pritzker is a terrible governor at Republican Day. As Brendan was talking about, there was really hardly any mention of Donald Trump at Republican Day, but there's plenty of talk about J.B. Pritzker and the long list of grievances they have with him on rising taxes in the state, other, liberal policies that he has approved. So, I think it's gotten pretty easy for Illinois Republicans in a way, because J.B. Pritzker's profile has grown nationally, and I think in this year's election, one of the things they really want to accomplish is they want to really hammer the governor, maybe embarrass him a little bit to the point where he would struggle on a presidential campaign. I think they kind of want to get the ball rolling on, the messages that are going to be out there at some point next year if the governor is on the presidential trail. So, Pritzker's been in office for coming up here on 2 full terms now. It's going to make him one of the longest serving, if not the longest serving Democrat governor in state history. Well, he remains, I think, generally pretty popular here in the state, is probably going to win re-election pretty easily. Running for a third term is not easy. And, the list of things that have happened under the governor have piled up. Republicans got a long list of things they don't like, and they're going to bring everything they got to this election and try and, ensure that he's not going to serve a third term as governor.
Well, this year's state fair was not only notable for the people who were there, it was equally notable for some of the people who were not. One of the most visible no-shows at the fair this year was Illinois House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch. Brendan and Ben, you've both been following this. What is it with Welch not showing up at a public event like the fair?
Yeah, so the speaker did not show up on Wednesday on Democrat Day to the brunch or to the fairgrounds. The excuse he gave was that he had to go home to be there for the first day of his daughter's school. She started seventh grade. But the speaker was in Springfield the previous night for a bunch of fundraisers, including his own, and he was being followed around by a digital billboard that was highlighting some of his social media activity, which includes, heart eye emojis and likes of pictures of young women in bikinis, among other things. So some of the scandals surrounding him, whether it's his handling of the Harry Benton sexual harassment case or again his own online activity, it kind of continues. There's obviously this working group going on right now to try to come up with some solutions to the House's some of the workplace issues. But even then, there's some controversy because three of the 11 members Democratic members that he appointed have declined to participate. I think the general consensus is that the speaker is, he's tried to weather the storm, but he's not out of it yet. And he certainly was not going to open himself up to scrutiny by showing up at a public place at the fairgrounds where several members of the media, including a lot of TV cameras, were roaming around pretty freely. Could have probably cornered him if he was there, and so I think he's trying to lay low a little bit and perhaps try to stay out of the spotlight.
Well, Ben, I remember at a lot of the press gaggles, and you were there, various reporters were asking whether or not Chris Welch is now the new Mike Madigan. They're asking Republicans that in particular. Is that what he's facing now? I mean, is that the kind of weight he has weighing around his neck? And do we think he's really in political trouble or in danger of losing the speakership?
I think Republicans would like him to be kind of in that same position Madigan was. It was the sexual harassment issues that happened under Mike Madigan. That was what really got people upset with him. The corruption charges came later after he left office. I think it's kind of twofold. On one hand, Republicans are certainly going to make ethics an issue in this election. They are not going to let the public forget that Chris Welch not only, in their opinion, mishandled a sexual harassment case, but has been involved in kind of, inappropriate activities himself. But on the other hand, one of the things that really stuck out to me from Republican Day was when Bob Grogan was asked that question, and he responded by saying, one, it's unfortunate we even have to discuss this and that this is an ongoing issue, but two, that the old Illinois Republican Party for so many years with Madigan in office was constantly focused on him. It was every election cycle was Mike Madigan, the Democrats, they're the worst group ever. That was the Republican message for years. And Bob Grogan, the new chair of the party, was saying, we made a mistake. We were too much of a one-trick pony, is what he said, focusing on Madigan. And now, sure, yeah, ethics is a big issue. What Speaker Welch has done is a big issue. But he wants Republican candidates to be focused on, one, what they're going to do to help improve ethics reform in Springfield, should they even get the opportunity to help legislate. And two, what are the other issues people care about? And when I was talking to Leader Curran and Leader McCombie about, what is the message from your candidates this cycle, especially on the House side, because of these ethics issues we're seeing, they both said that affordability still remains a top priority. And, Leader Curran said he's not even hearing a lot about ethics issues and Speaker Welch and Harry Benton at the doors. So, I think as much as maybe, Speaker Welch is in trouble within his own caucus and certainly within the public and the headlines we've seen, Republicans aren't going to solely dwell on that this year.
Okay. Well, besides Speaker Welch not showing up, also noticeably absent was any sort of national figure or big name keynote speaker on the Republican side. Jerry, what do you make of the fact that the Republicans don't seem to be bringing in any, big national figure to, like the Democrats traditionally do, to rally their troops at the fair?
Yeah, they're not bringing in big name figures. They're not bringing in much money. I think Rick Pearson in the Tribune referred to them as a party bordering on dormancy. A lot of their statewide officials, no one really heard of until this round. Their treasurer candidate had to get 5,000 write-in votes to even make the ballot because nobody put themselves on the ballot on the Republican ticket for treasurer. So they're not, they're not the big names that you see and say, oh, no, I need to give them some money. They got a chance to unseat these well-funded Democrats. That's not saying anything to their policy platforms, just the fact that, they rose out of kind of nowhere, most of these candidates, to be on this statewide ballot. And Bailey, of course, has the losing record in 2022. I believe I was at his campaign headquarters. I was doing a radio interview at 7 p.m. when the polls closed. I hung up the phone and I was greeted to news that the AP had called it for Pritzker. So, I mean, I think even with the president who has endorsed Bailey in the past, he doesn't like endorsing losers. And, the GOP is going to have a long way to go if they want to flip seats. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it's a foregone conclusion that the Democrats are going to win, but, all signs are pointing that it's going to take a lot, and maybe people don't want to be associated with tickets that are viewed as a long way from winning.
Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Capital Cast. I want to thank Brendan, Ben, and Jerry for being here this week. If you enjoyed this podcast, remember to like us on your podcast app. We also invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Blue Sky. Until next time, on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team, this is Peter Hancock saying thank you for listening.